What's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the CPA Zone, the podcast where we discuss tax strategies and accounting tips for entrepreneurs and real estate investors. My name is Ryan Pulis, and our company, the Pulis Group, offers tax planning and advisory services for entrepreneurs like you. Whether it's bookkeeping, tax planning, or CFO services that you're looking for, we've got you covered. What's up, everybody? Ryan Pulis here with another episode of the CPA Zone. Today, we're going to talk about what happens when you have personal use with your short-term rental. First, let's review what a short-term rental is and why you may be interested. There's been a lot of talk about short-term rental strategies these last few years, especially since COVID started. Short-term rental is really just an exception to the definition of a rental under Section 469 of the Internal Revenue Code. So this is what's referred to as the 7-day rule. Under the passive activity loss rules, the IRS deems an activity with an average stay of less than 7 days not to be considered a rental for purposes of the passive loss rules. So because a short-term rental is not a rental per se, for purposes of these passive activity loss rules, you don't have to qualify as a real estate professional to deduct your losses. All you need to do is demonstrate material participation in your short-term rental activity. Then you can deduct those losses against your other non-passive income like W-2 wages or business income. Just because the activity is not a rental activity for passive activity loss rules doesn't mean that it's reported on Schedule C. This is one of the errors I see a lot. People think that because it's not a rental under the passive activity loss rules, it belongs on Schedule C. Now, it's possible your short-term rental could be reported on Schedule C. So like other rentals, if you provide substantial services, then that activity belongs on Schedule C. If you're not providing substantial services along with the rental, then the correct place to report that rental activity is on Schedule E, just like your typical long-term rental. So in my experience, it's not very common to see short-term rental investors actually providing these substantial services and reporting the activity on Schedule C, where Schedule C is where you typically report your traditional businesses. Now remember, a Schedule C business is also subject to self-employment taxes. That's the 15.3%, so 7.65 employee portion, 7.65 employer portion. Those cover Social Security and Medicare. When you're self-employed, such as reporting business income on Schedule C, you have to cover both. But not to get too far away from our short-term rental discussion, in short, the most common place is going to be Schedule E, unless you're providing substantial services that require you to report on Schedule C. And some examples of substantial services include things, just think like hotel-type services. So daily cleaning or maid service while the tenants are in the property. Cleaning between tenant stays does not rise to the level of a substantial service. Other things are transportation services, food and beverage services, other concierge type services. So these are common things you'll find provided by hotels, and this is going to rise to a more active business rather than just a rental activity. So if you're not providing these services, your short-term rental is going to be taxed just like a traditional long-term rental when it comes to reporting on Schedule E and not being subject to self-employment taxes. So not all services a hotel provides automatically subject you to Schedule C treatment or self-employment tax. There are other things that a hotel might do that are specifically excluded from the definition of substantial services. These are things like service necessary to permit the lawful use of the property, keeping it in safe conditions at the property. Your typical repairs and maintenance, or cleaning and maintenance of common areas, trash collection, providing utilities and security, furnishing the unit's not going to change anything. That's perfectly acceptable and it's not a substantial service. Other things like providing incidental things like water and toiletries, all excluded from that definition of substantial service. So it's really like the daily cleaning or food and beverage concierge type stuff. So now that we've reviewed the short-term rental rules, let's talk about the personal use of a rental property. So the personal use rules, so these rules apply to all rental properties, not just short-term rentals. You'll often hear these referred to as the vacation home rules. And so the vacation home rules are a special set of rules that the IRS put out. With residential property that's used both personally and as a rental, the deduction of expenses depends on two other factors. The first is whether the property qualifies as a second home or not. The second factor is the amount of time the taxpayer personally uses the property. So if the personal use is more than the greater of 14 days or 10% of the number of days rented at fair market rent, then the property is considered a second home. So if you rent out your property for 200 days during the year, and then you also spend 3 weeks, 21 days there personally, that property is going to be considered a second home. In the case of a second home, you're going to report income and expenses on Schedule E and allocate the expenses between the rental and personal use. The personal portion of interest and taxes can be deducted on Schedule A if you're itemizing and subject to the usual limits. To the time of this recording, generally mortgage interest is deductible on debt up to $750,000, and currently the state and local taxes, which include real estate taxes, are capped at $10,000. Now, the key, this is where you can get tripped up with your short-term rental, is when it's considered a second home due to personal use, your losses are not allowed. They're not deductible. This is what can trip people up with a short-term rental that has personal use. So if you're going after the short-term rental loophole, I'm sure I just pissed off any accountants listening by referring to it as a loophole. But if you're planning on deducting your short-term rental losses and have too much personal use, this is going to blow up your whole strategy. Your losses aren't going to be deductible. So a lot of people using the short-term rental strategy, they're buying a short-term rental. They are going for that material participation, likely running a cost-sake study and taking advantage of bonus depreciation so they get the big year one write-off to reduce their taxes, offset their W-2 or business income. And then in future years, they can let the property be managed by someone else where they don't have to show material participation, and taking those losses not as substantial. So when you are going through the strategy, especially in year one, if you're looking to deduct those losses, be very careful with your personal use. So what exactly is personal use? So the IRS counts days used by any of the following as a personal use day. So any days when the property is used by the owner, by family members of the owner, anyone that pays less than fair rental price, and anyone under an arrangement that lets you use their dwelling unit in exchange. So you'll hear people sometimes saying, like, I'll rent your short-term rental if you rent mine so we can both get a customer stay before the end of the year. Well, that's not going to fly, because when you do that, you work out an arrangement like that, those are considered personal use days. So be careful. Now, an exception to personal use, so if you're using it as the owner because you're there to fix the property or do routine repairs and maintenance, if you spend a day working on the property, fixing it up, that's not considered a personal use day. So in this case, the majority of your day is going to be spent on repairs and maintenance. You're not just going to do a quick stop and fix a doorknob. You're going to spend the majority of your day doing repairs and maintenance. Then it's not considered personal use. But the key is be very careful. I would advise not having any personal use days if you're going for the short-term rental strategy and showing material participation so you can deduct losses against your regular income. So basically, to summarize, the short-term rentals, those with an average customer stay of 7 days or less, the popular strategy the last few years, see it all over TikTok. Your short-term rentals, technically not a passive activity, so much easier to deduct your losses. All you need to do is show material participation, which that in and of itself isn't always easy. But if you materially participate, you can use those short-term rental losses against your other active income, such as W-2 wages and business income. However, if you have personal use days at your short-term rental, be very careful not to exceed the greater of 14 days or 10% of the fair rental days, or you risk making your losses non-deductible. I'd advise, again, I'll just say it one more time, I'd advise no personal use days, especially in that first year where you're going for the larger write-offs. This is a short-term rental. It should be treated just like a business. That about does it. If you found value in this episode, please leave a 5-star review and hit the like and subscribe button. Until next time, have a great day. So that about does it for this episode of the CPA Zone. Thanks for listening, and I hope you found something valuable that you can take away. We are taking on new clients, and if you'd like to work with us, then go to our website and fill out the client intake form on our contact page. This can be found at thepulicegroup.com/contact. That's ThePulicegroup.com/contact.